down too. If we don't be closer up.
I don't mind, it's okay, I don't mind the mic. That's okay. So yeah, thank you all for turning out and welcoming me to somewhere I've not been before. I hadn't been in California at all until I arrived here on losing track of the days. 2 days ago?
Yes. Los Angeles you haven't been to.
Yes, yes. I'm losing track. Where am I? Anyway. It's okay.
Disneyland. Disneyland. Mecca of culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we are, 12th anniversary of the opening of Guantanamo. I don't know, you may be even more cynical than me, but I didn't expect that we would be here today in the same position that we are, where there are still 155 men held there. I certainly didn't think we'd be in a position where President Obama had appointed a high-level interagency task force to review the cases of the prisoners, and they'd spent a year deliberating on the prisoners' cases, and had come to a decision about what they recommended, whether they should continue to be held, whether they should be put on trial, whether they should be released. And to find that 4 years on from those decisions being taken, 76 of the 155 men still held, that's nearly half of them, are still held even though they were cleared for release. So the America of President Obama, sadly, holds people indefinitely without charge or trial, but holds a review process and tells those men, we've had a review process, so we don't want to carry on holding you indefinitely without charge or trial, and then carries on holding them indefinitely without charge or trial. There's something wrong with that picture. And the way that I put it is that that's worse than the way that totalitarian regimes behave, because it's totalitarian regimes who imprison people without charge or trial. What we expect of our governments in countries that are supposed to be civilized is that if you're apprehended, it will be because you're arrested in connection with a crime that you allegedly committed, and you will then be put on trial if there's evidence to justify it. Or, if it's wartime, you're a prisoner of war. You're taken off the battlefield, you're held unmolested until the end of hostilities and protected by the Geneva Conventions. And that hasn't happened with the men of Guantanamo. They were picked up in all kinds of ways by the Bush administration. Many of them were bought for bounty payments. They were sold to the US forces by their allies, the Afghan and Pakistani forces. It's easy to see why that happened. They were being offered an average of $5,000 in a part of the world where $5,000 is equivalent to somewhere between $125,000 and $250,000. And all they had to do was identify foreigners and suggest to the US forces that these guys were Al-Qaeda or Taliban. They'd get hauled off, and in exchange they'd get this money. There were leaflets that were rained down over Afghanistan in this period that put together by the US PSYOPs forces, psychological operations, which promised villagers in Afghanistan enough money to look after your village for life if you hand over the Al-Qaeda and Taliban suspects. So, you know, we can see why people ended up there who had nothing to do with anything. But from the beginning, there was a deliberate effort by the Bush administration to make us all believe that these men, we didn't need to think about them, we just needed to trust that they were the worst of the worst and not ask any questions. We were being kept safe. So people were not encouraged to ask questions like, how are we supposed to know these are the worst of the worst? Not supposed to ask questions about how are these people captured, how are these people being treated. And actually it took nearly 2.5 years before this prison, where people were held absolutely without rights, was ruled on by the Supreme Court. And there were a variety of cases bounced to and forth in the lower courts until the Supreme Court was asked whether these men had the right to ask a judge independently whether there was any basis for them being held. The ancient writ of habeas corpus, which originated in a field in West London when the barons were forcing King John to stop arbitrarily imprisoning them in 1215. It only applied to the barons of England at that point, but over the years, over the centuries, it became our protection against executive overreach, our protection against tyranny, the knowledge that you cannot be imprisoned without having had a trial and being judged by a jury of your peers. And it's the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, which habeas corpus is in next year. And it would be very nice to think that Guantanamo, where habeas corpus has not been respected, wouldn't still be around when there will be celebrations around the world to mark the 800th anniversary of habeas corpus, that's for sure. The men nominally were given these rights by the Supreme Court in June 2004. It was very significant in one way. It allowed attorneys to go to the prison and meet prisoners for the first time, to be assigned to their cases and to try and represent them in the courts. And so it pierced the secrecy that had existed at Guantanamo up until that point. And, make no mistake, the secrecy that surrounded the prison could only have been for one reason. It could have been so that the US government and its representatives could do things at Guantanamo that they didn't want the world to know about. And they didn't want the world to know about them because what they were doing there was wrong. And if you remember, in February 2002, President Bush issued an executive order just after, it was actually a presidential memorandum just after Guantanamo had opened, confirming what his advisors had been deliberating about and had decided on, which was that the prisoners at Guantanamo didn't have the protections of the Geneva Conventions. And he made some noises about, we'll try and look after them in a manner consistent with the Geneva Conventions, so long as it involves aspects of military necessity. And it didn't really mean anything. If you think about what it means not to deprive prisoners of the protections of the Geneva Conventions, it means you could do what you want with them. And that was the start of the official approval of the use of torture. Later there came memos that were in an attempt to justify it. And sadly, I have to say that from February 2002, when this was issued, until June 2006, when the Supreme Court made another important ruling in a case called Hamdan v. Rumsfeld, torture was effectively official US policy. And the decision in Hamdan v. Rumsfeld which threw out the military commissions, the trial system that had been dreamt up for the Guantanamo prisoners, threw that out as unconstitutional. The Supreme Court of the United States reminded the Bush administration that you can't hold prisoners without rights, that they have the baseline protections of Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, and that guarantees freedom from torture and from all kinds of abusive treatment. Not coincidentally, a few months later, President Bush turned up in the Rose Garden saying to the world, you've all been saying to me for some time that you were convinced that we had secret prisons, and I told you that we didn't. Well, we did, but we've closed them. And then he moved prisoners that had been held in these black sites to Guantanamo, and certainly part of that reason was because suddenly they'd been told by the Supreme Court that there were baseline methods of treatment of prisoners. So, eventually we ended up with President Obama, and he made his great promise on the second day that he was in office that he was going to close Guantanamo within a year, an executive order that he issued. And obviously that didn't happen. It's 5 years since he made the promise, and Guantanamo is still open. So what happened? Well, first of all, he made the promise and then he didn't really do anything. He appointed the task force that was established to review the prisoners' cases. But while he was doing that, he didn't do much else. And into that vacuum, really, people who wished to oppose him on Guantanamo stepped up. And that was the Republican Party. It was also members of his own party. And he lost the initiative. And as a result, he's kind of been on the run from Congress ever since. Congress first didn't like his idea of moving the prisoners to a facility on the US mainland so that he could shut the prison down. And they refused to allow him to have the money to do that. Then they refused to allow him to move prisoners to the US mainland for any reason. And he'd wanted to hold trials here. That was cut off as an option. In the last few years, what happened was that, emboldened, I think, by their success, lawmakers then decided that they would tell the president that he wasn't allowed to release anyone from Guantanamo unless he was prepared to certify to them that any released prisoner would not be able to engage in terrorist activities against the United States. well, you know, I know these men's stories quite well. I can say that it was extremely unlikely that anybody would take up terrorist activities against the United States, but it's not a promise you can make. You can't promise what someone's going to do after they're released. And it made it extremely difficult. Now, you know, President Obama always retained the possibility to do something about this. There was a waiver in the legislation, specifically in the legislation, allowing him to override Congress if he thought it was in the national security interest of the United States. And if any of you have heard President Obama speak eloquently about Guantanamo, you know that he is very capable of explaining why the continued existence of Guantanamo is very detrimental to the national security interest of the United States. So he should have used this waiver, and he didn't do it because he didn't think that it was worth it politically. He didn't think that it was worth spending political capital doing the right thing, doing what he promised. So we ended up with a situation last year where for 3 years, only 5 prisoners have been released from Guantanamo. The combination of the opposition in Congress and the President's refusal to deal with it had led to almost nobody leaving Guantanamo. And the prisoners were in such despair by this point. I remember a year ago, those of us campaigning on Guantanamo were worn out. We couldn't see any way out of this. Years rolled by and nothing was happening. Progress on the prison had been stopped because it had turned into this disgustingly cynical game of political football, frankly. And the men at Guantanamo, in despair last year, went on a huge hunger strike with the intention of, you know, you don't go on a hunger strike and risk your life purely in a conscious way to prove a point. These men were clearly in despair. But the aim behind it was to remind the world what was happening to them and to tell all 3 branches of the United States government that they had been abandoned. And it worked. You know, the world did wake up to what was happening at Guantanamo. The media started reporting the stories, both here in the US and internationally. And international bodies started to criticize President Obama for not moving on it. The European Parliament, the United Nations. 1 million people signed signatures online last year. Maybe some of you did. I hope so. They were noticed. You know, the President, Congress, they can't fail to have noticed that in previous years nobody really cared, and last year 1 million people said, can we get this wretched place closed down, please? And the President promised to start releasing prisoners from Guantanamo, and he promised to appoint 2 envoys to help with the release of prisoners and to help deal with the closure of the prison. And he promised to drop a ban that he'd imposed on releasing Yemeni prisoners. And this is quite a key part of the story, because I don't expect you to be keeping up with the numbers here, but I said there were 76 cleared prisoners out of the 155 men still held, and 2/3 of those men, 55 of those men, are Yemen. A Nigerian man, but apparently recruited in Yemen, tried and failed to blow up a plane bound for the US on Christmas Day 2009 with a bomb in his underwear. I'm very glad to report, as I'm sure you know, that the bomb didn't explode. But when he was seized and it was discovered that he'd been recruited in Yemen, the backlash against Yemen meant that President Obama was persuaded to impose a ban on releasing anyone from Yemen. Well, there was no connection between those men who'd been cleared for release by a presidential task force and this man who had attempted this plot, except in the very broadest sense, Yemen, the whole country. I mean, my analogy to that is that if someone from California is released from prison and commits a crime, you don't really get the authorities saying, you know, the best way around this is that we never release anyone from California from prison again. But that's how it works with Guantanamo. So these men are still held. And although President Obama dropped his ban and has released 11 men, that is something for us to be thankful for after this appalling situation where it had almost dried to a halt, where there were almost more people dying at Guantanamo to get out than there were people leaving alive. 11 men have been released, and here we are in a new year. Congress has recently eased its restrictions on the release of prisoners. Everything is in place for President Obama to release those 76 men. He appointed the envoys. There were 2 men. There's a man called Paul Lewis in the Pentagon and a man called Cliff Sloan in the State Department. They're both veteran diplomats. I don't think they took this job on so they could fail. That doesn't look good on your CV. So they're there to help get prisoners out of Guantanamo. And I think it would be helpful for us to write to them, to encourage them, to ask them what they're doing. keep an eye on them. We have to keep an eye on this process, because what's been demonstrated with Guantanamo is that if we don't keep pressure on them, they resort to doing nothing again, and these men carry on rotting there. Now, you know, I don't mind if they're going to put people on trial, but when they've said they've cleared people for release, or when they haven't demonstrated why they're holding people, and it goes on year after year, I think that's not good for any of us. So hopefully, you know, you'll bear in mind that there are these people and talk about them and do what you can to keep the pressure on to make sure that they're released. The other group of men in Guantanamo are ones that the task force told the president should either be put on trial or should continue to be held without charge or trial. That latter category is very difficult for me, and it should be for you, I would say, because it was a specific group of men. There were 48 of them when President Obama designated them. 2 of them subsequently died. And he issued an executive order in March 2011 authorizing these men to continue to be held without charge or trial. So this was an issue he inherited from President Bush. And effectively everyone still at Guantanamo is held without charge or trial, but some of them are supposed to be released. These ones that he designated, that he owns that policy of having decided that a certain number of people at Guantanamo would be held without charge or trial. And that's not the way that we do business, as far as I understand it, in America or in Britain. To go back to what I said at the beginning, you need to be either a criminal who's been tried, or you need to be a prisoner of war and treated as such. Not these men without rights. He promised a review process for these men, because you know, he knew that people like me and human rights groups and people like you were not happy at this idea. So to kind of sweeten it, he said, "But we will review their cases regularly to find out whether you know, we still think they're too dangerous to be released. They're too dangerous to release because they're being held on the basis of information that they say they can't use in the trial, which makes it unreliable." But they said they'd review it. It took until November, just gone, for the first of these reviews to take place. That's nearly 3 years. But they're underway now. They're moving very slowly. The next one isn't scheduled until the end of this month, I think. So at that rate, it's going to take them about 16 years. So I hope they'll speed it up a bit. A Yemeni man was allowed from Guantanamo to testify by video link for 6 hours to the panel of military and intelligence people on the mainland who were listening to him and asking him questions. We didn't see any of that. We didn't get a proper report of it. Nothing was unclassified. But I'm glad to say that last week, this man was cleared for release as a result of this process. What that means is he joins the list of people cleared for release. And he's a Yemeni. So, but I think that, again, that's going in the right direction. But you see, all of these stories seem to end up with the need for people to be released. But the last bit of this story about where we're at with the prisoners is that when the Senate and the House Armed Services Committees got together to thrash out the details relating to Guantanamo in this year's National Defense Authorization Act, they approved one part of what the Senate had come up with, which was easing the restrictions on the release of prisoners. But the House wouldn't pass the other set of proposals from the Senate, which the Senate had passed. And they were that the President should be able to move men from Guantanamo to face trials, to continue to be detained, or even to undergo urgent medical treatment. And Jason's been there, and he'll tell you recently about what state the men are in and why there would be a need to include a provision in a piece of legislation for dealing with the illnesses of the prisoners at Guantanamo. It didn't get passed. Now, Guantanamo cannot be closed without some of those men being brought to the US mainland. Obviously, physically, that place cannot be got rid of with people still in it. And not everybody is cleared for release. Not everyone's going. Some men need to be tried. And these other men need to have the reviews taking place in their cases. And I would say in most of those cases, those men shouldn't continue to be held. But I think it would be good for everyone to look this year at what Congress is up to and what the President says about this vital next step. Closing Guantanamo by moving the rest of the prisoners here and then dealing with them appropriately here. And some people worry that if they did that, the system of Guantanamo would take root on the US mainland. I really don't think that's going to happen. I think it only gets to happen because it's out there. And it's happening to these foreign people that you were told not to worry about over in Cuba. It's very difficult to get to Cuba to the base. Everything costs a lot, but it remains further from where the law should be than if it was here, I believe. So I think it's a constructive way forward to see what we can do to help the President, to help those members of Congress who started helping last year, because they really haven't been helpful for the years before that, and work, hopefully, together towards the closure of Guantanamo. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And this is also sort of I shouldn't say sort of, it's a pleasure. I've known Andy for many years, and to be able to speak with him this evening is great. So thank you, Andy, and thanks everyone. I focus for the most part in discussing Guantanamo just on my reporting. I think that's the part that I just am so heavily involved with. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I've been working on, the difficulties in covering Guantanamo, finding loose information, my recent trips to Guantanamo. And I see some familiar faces here who were present at some previous discussions I gave. So hello everyone, and thanks for coming back. So this may be repetitive for some of you. The tagline at Guantanamo is safe, humane, legal, transparent. That is on the Joint Task Force Guantanamo website. That's their motto. And for the military commissions, it's funny, theirs is fairness, justice, and something else, which I forget. But the transparency part is what is to me, very funny, because as a journalist, it is so difficult to obtain any information with regard to Guantanamo, to report what what is actually happening. And I've relied heavily on documents to be able, or in order to support and back up my reporting. Filing Freedom of Information Act requests, for example. Last week I sued the Department of Defense for failing to comply with 47 Freedom of Information Act requests I filed since 2012. And thank you. In addition to that, since you're applauding, may I just add that I've also 2 days ago sued the CIA for failing to comply with actually
right there. That's where to drive.
Well, thank you for failing to actually comply with my FOIA request to release the Senate report on the CIA's torture program, which I'm sure many people must be familiar with. And there's also was a secret internal report at the CIA. But the reason I do that is because it's so difficult to obtain information. And during my last trip to Guantanamo this past, actually just about a month ago right now, in December, right before the holidays, I was the only member of the media there. This was right at the kind of that tail end, or I shouldn't say the tail end of the hunger strike, but it was at a time when for some reason they decided, the folks at Guantanamo and the United States Southern Command that has oversight of the Joint Task Force that operates Guantanamo, they decided to stop providing journalists with daily statistics on the number of hunger strikers. So for years and years and years, we were able to find out what how many prisoners were on hunger strike. And now they stopped doing it. And last year, it was a very, very big year for Guantanamo. And there's no question that every move President Obama made was as a result of the hunger strike. And so it was very effective. And as Andy indicated, it was not just a tool to raise awareness, but it was also, they were in despair. But it did work that way as well as to raise awareness about their plight. And so, we would call up the officials at Guantanamo. They would provide us with these daily updates of how many prisoners were being force-fed and how many were on hunger strike. And so they cut that off in December, and this was right as about a week or so before I headed down to the prison. And for those who have not heard me speak about this previously, as Andy said, getting to Guantanamo is difficult. It's certainly difficult if you're a reporter in Los Angeles. I have to fly to Florida, have to get a charter jet from Florida to Guantanamo. Then you have to get on a ferry, to go over to the island. And it takes, for the most part, a day. So try to imagine that the lawyers who represent these men, they're having great difficulty. And this sort of, if you can go back to the late December of 2001, when John Yoo wrote this memo. This was before the torture memos. John Yoo wrote a memo in December of 2001 explaining why Guantanamo was such a great place to hold, so-called enemy combatants. And the reason was because he would never, not only would they not have the right to habeas corpus, which he was later proved wrong on, excuse me, but it's so difficult to get there. And you'll never be able to really, nobody will be able to access them. So it's very difficult. But during this last trip, it was important for me to try to obtain some information, as difficult as it is, about what was happening. I had previously taken a tour of the prison in May of last year, right at the height of the hunger strike. This time around, I met, there was a new guard force that was there. They get rotated out about every 9 months. So it was a new guard force. I wanted to, interact with them. There was a new medical staff. There was a new public relations official, and actually a new joint task force commander. So everyone was new, and with each new cast of characters, if you will, come new rules and the way that those rules are enforced. Try to imagine that these prisoners have seen thousands and thousands of guards and medical staff move in and out of the prison over the past 12 years. So when they become comfortable, for lack of a better term, to the way certain things are, it could be something little, such as their mail. Getting their mail, the way that where they can have their mail. And sometimes you will get a new guard force that will come in and say, nope, can't do that anymore. Your mail has to go over here. So this is all they have. These little things. These little things are what makes up their their life currently. So during this trip, one of my first questions obviously was, why did you stop reporting the number of hunger strikers? And they're very blunt and said, I'm paraphrasing, but this was the message was, they were too successful. The prisoners generated way too much media attention. And that's what was said to me. I reported that. They generated way too much media attention with their hunger strike, and, quote, it's a self-perpetuating story. So we don't want to feed into that, and we don't want to sort of make it seem as if we're, this is the military officials saying this, that we're helping them with generating such media attention. So we cut it off. That was actually one of the FOIA requests I filed. I'm sure they're very annoyed with me, especially now that I sued them. But it's just an indication of how difficult it is at this point to do my job, as a reporter. I want to be able to, inform the public, inform all of you about what's happening at Guantanamo. So, we rely upon the attorneys who meet with the prisoners, their unclassified notes, to build a narrative, to give their, to give a voice to the voiceless, if you will. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. During this last trip, it was actually, I didn't speak about this yesterday, but it was the holidays. It was just a week or two before Christmas. And it's too bad I didn't bring sort of a projector or computer, but there was this amazing sort of, when I say amazing, I don't mean like, wow, that's so cool. It was amazing in the sense of like, you're driving up this sort of main drag in Guantanamo, and there was these holiday lights that literally looked like it was right off of a postcard that said, "Season's greetings from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba." And then you had right behind it this massive Christmas tree, and these sort of, rocking horse and a Santa Claus. And, just for those who have not heard, just to sort of give you an overview of Guantanamo, it's become symbolic with the prison. Rightfully so, I understand it. That's what everyone, sort of thinks about when they hear Guantanamo. Guantanamo itself is 45 square miles. It's the size of Poughkeepsie, New York. If you've ever, been to Poughkeepsie, it's a large town. It actually resembles, I was telling Andy, it doesn't look that much different from sort of Euclid Avenue, the main part of the base. You have fast food restaurants that are sort of dotted around there, single family homes, and on the other side of the island, in a desolate part of the island that you have to, have an escort to get to, where there are armed guards there, military, is where the prison is. And the way that this was described to me prior to seeing the prison, and this was described to me by a military defense attorney who represents one of the 9/11 accused. He said, "Yeah, this is don't you think this is strange? This is look at this. It's like a small town, and then up the block there's a concentration camp." And that's how he described it. And it was quite chilling to sort of hear that. And going into the prison again this time around, the tour consisted of walking through the cell blocks, an empty cell block, nobody was there. Looking at the cells that they laid everything out. This is their, this is what their the kind of shoes they get, the kind of toiletries that they receive. This is what their prison garb looks like. So everything is just very choreographed and scripted. And what I'm trying to do is I don't want to say necessarily catch them off guard, but to cut through that. And it was difficult, if not impossible, to certainly do that at the two main camps that exist at this point, Camps 5 and Camp 6, because it's they're trained very well. In Camp 6, that's the communal camp, what they call. That's where the prisoners at this point who live in a communal setting. Make no mistake, by the way. When I say it's a communal camp, it's not as if they're it's like a sleepover at your daughter or son's that are having, where it's like, oh look, everyone's on the floor. They're still in in cells that are about 10 by 6 that look like clearly these are jail cells. This is not a comfortable setting, although they try to impress upon reporters and the media, people that are visiting, that this is a very comfortable setting. They're still, prisoners who live like prisoners. And but I did get to observe, this sort of communal area where, around lunch or breakfast time, they get to eat with each other. And what I saw was, and they can't see me, I'm behind one-way glass. I'm not allowed to take pictures of their faces. I'm not allowed to speak with them. But I saw these men who just looked so old, frail, gray, graying beards. Most of them have been there for, at this point, 12 years. Bad sight, because what I'm seeing is, I'm just seeing a person, behind glass, a human being. It's not, I don't have a name. They're not sharing any names with me, so I don't know what they're accused of. There are some that that are accused of horrific crimes, as you know, as we've been told. But you know, as Andy indicated, for the most part, every one of these camps, these 2 camps, are, you know, they're either foot soldiers or frankly, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was a Yemeni detainee prisoner named Adnan Latif, who was cleared for release by the Obama and the Bush administrations. And a federal court judge said, yes, we should, you know, release him until an appeals court struck that decision down. And he died in September of 2012 at the prison. They claim that he committed suicide. And it's his death and the reaction to his death and the policies that they put in place there that ultimately gave rise to this hunger strike that eventually became the larger issue of being, you know, this indefinite detention where there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. So, you know, again, during this trip, I went into the hospital to speak with the they call it the detainee hospital, to speak with the medical staff, the nurses who administer the force feeding. I was shown the force feeding chair. I asked questions such as, do they resist? You know, are they fighting it? And I want to see what they're going to say to that. You know, and plus, it's an opportunity to look at them in, you know, face to face. When you're speaking to someone over the phone, you know, keep in mind, I'm in Los Angeles, they're in Guantanamo. You know, they certainly can say anything they want to me when I'm asking them on the phone, but in face to face, I feel that it's just a bit different. And they're like, yeah, well, you know, some of them do resist, but for the most part, you know, they're okay with it. They're okay with, you know, they're okay with force feeding. They don't have any problems. These, you know, you know, make it clear that the you know, physicians don't have any problems with the, you know, criticism from human rights groups or medical ethicists about what they're doing. And as I indicated last night when Andy and I were giving another talk, is that, you know, I don't know what their names are. They don't have, first of all, I'm not allowed to print their names, even if I knew their names. And I'm not allowed to print them. It's part of the sort of ground rules. You have to, when you go to Guantanamo, you have to sign a set of ground rules that you agree to abide by. And for the most part, they're fine, agree to abide by it. It's very important to get the color, you know, to get those details that I can try to give you all a picture of what's happening there. So they don't have any problems with it because really nobody knows that they're there. Perhaps their families know, but I'm not telling the world that Joe Smith is over here force feeding someone because I don't know his name, and you know, I'm not allowed to print it otherwise. So so this was a very you know, like I said, a very interesting, surreal trip. It was strange to sort of, right next to the prison there is you know, a chow hall where all the guards go to, where I ate lunch at, and there was this, you know, one day there was this, it was surf and turf day, and they had lobster tails and crab legs and steak, and to see this, you know, this line out the door, and like right next door there's like, you know, there's the prison, there's, you know, the remnants of some of it, there's, you know, to see, you know, the Santa Claus and the gingerbread houses, and there's, you know, signs of happiness, if you will, where, or greetings or celebrations behind all of this. You know, I should note that some of the guards, you know, I spoke with, particularly ones in Camp 6, I said, so how long have you been here? And he said, you know, I've been here for about 6 weeks. He's like, I'm ready. I'm going to quote him, so well, actually, never mind. I was going to say quote him directly, but I realized where we are, so I won't do that. But he said, I'm ready to get the F out of here. You know, he wanted to leave. He said, this isn't for me. He doesn't even have a job back home. He said he just wants to leave. And it was, you know, sort of, if you can think about that, we're in a, you know, a communal camp where the prisoners are being held, and I'm looking at them behind the glass, and I'm speaking with the guard, and he's saying, I want to go home, and guess what? He will. You know, and I would imagine that, you know, some of them do as well. So this is sort of like this odd and difficult balancing act, you know, that you have to contend with. But you know, like I said, it's during that week that I was there, I was really unable to obtain any, you know, real information that I felt to be of great value in the sense of, you know, revelations, other than what I indicated, that it was admitted that they stopped reporting the hunger strike numbers because they were so successful. Because they were so successful in generating media attention. Because they got President Obama to make this major speech last May, which led to the, you know, release of about 11 prisoners. So that's, you know, that has to come to an end. But on the last day, and I realize this is being taped, but I'll take my chances. On the last day that I was there, and I was writing a story, and I'm in this media operations center, and you know, I obtained you know, what the official Guantanamo talking points are, which more or less kind of answered my questions as to why, or I understood, I should say, why my questions were not being answered. And I'll just read some of them to you. And these are sort of the talking points that that are provided to the public affairs officials that advise them how to respond to journalists like me, like Andy. And so what you can talk about, again, keep in mind what you can talk about with journalists at Guantanamo. Mission: safe, humane, legal, transparent. And let me just say that you know, each question that I even asked of the medical staff, I said, do you have any, you know, I said, this is actually one of the questions, do you have any concerns? What is your response to, you know, these media groups, excuse me, these, you know, human rights and medical ethicists that, you know, that are harshly critical of what you're doing? And they said, well, you know, we're just focused on the mission. We're just focused on the mission. We're just focused on the mission. So, you know, keep in mind that, you know, in Guantanamo, what's happening outside of Guantanamo with regard to policy, what's being debated, what's being discussed, should it close, shouldn't it close, when will it close, who's going to be released, that discussion does not take place, you know, inside the wire. Does not take place in Guantanamo. As far as, you know, they're being told and concerned, this is a, you know, these prisoners are hardened terrorists, and our job is to guard them. So there is no, hey, what do you think, will it be closed? They don't discuss that. So just getting back to these talking points, you know, again, what you can talk about. Care, custody, and control of detainees. Detainee interaction with guard force. Now keep in mind, detainee interaction with guard force. Not guard force interaction with detainee. Detainee interaction with guard force. So Andy and I often hear about, you know, stories from the attorneys about physical, you know, about you know, violence and abuse that takes place with regard to, you know, the stories that the prisoners tell their attorneys. And, you know, the military just shoots that down, says that's absolutely not true. So one of the talking points that they, you know, say here is, you know, detainee interaction with the guard force. What they impressed upon me, this trip as well as the previous one, is that, you know, they're belligerent. They do not appreciate what they get. They throw feces at the guards. They're biting them. They're, you know, and I am not trying to discount or say that, you know, may not be true. But, you know, in any sort of prison setting, you know, something like that actually, you know, does happen. It's not unusual. For some reason, they're really making it a point at Guantanamo to sort of, you know, have us, you know, sort of write about that, which, you know, or sort of see them as sort of, you know, again, these kind of animals, not human. This is what they're doing. They're throwing their feces over everyone. And, you know, getting back to the talking points, detainee operations before and after a hunger strike. That's, again, something you can talk about. And challenges: splashing, spitting, biting, and assaults. And one more talking point. My, quote, day in the life as a guard, unquote, story. And then what you cannot talk about. Task Force Platinum, Camp 7. Task Force Platinum is the top secret guard force that watches over, guards the high-value prisoners like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the former CIA prisoners. So they can't talk about that. Specific ISNs, internment numbers, or detainee names. So they can't, if I had a question about Shakir Amr, who was the last British prisoner there, they won't acknowledge it or respond to it. Higher headquarters remarks, investigations or their results, speculation on detainee release, policy other than detention of detainees, suicide. Can't talk about suicide. So as I indicated, there was a prisoner who they claim committed suicide in September of 2012. And again, I had more questions about that this trip, and they wouldn't discuss it. You can't discuss the high-value detainees, attorney allegations. Can't discuss that. Reasons for detention, presidential remarks, construction. So, the number of things you cannot talk about far outweighs what you can talk about. And then, some tips that they have here is, remember, own the interview. Stay confident, stay in your lane. Everything is on the record. Avoid your own opinion. Provide only the facts. Never say no comment. So after, and I wrote about this in one of my reports, and I started to, understand better. It's different when you see it on paper. Wow, I'm never going to get my, questions answered. And that sort of, motivated me to say, yeah, it's time to sue the Department of Defense for not responding to my 47 Freedom of Information Act request that in which I requested documents. So, one thing that I do want to sort of offer up, which Andy briefly spoke about, is one of the fears that does exist right now is that they're very worried about a prisoner dying. They obviously don't want that to happen, particularly now where so much attention, global attention, has been brought to Guantanamo as a result of this hunger strike. So they've been flying in every 2 to 3 months physicians to treat the prisoner, flying them in from the U.S. at great cost to taxpayers to treat prisoners who have been suffering from a wide range of ailments such as diabetes, cataracts. When I was there were 2 prisoners that were going to be undergoing surgery for cataracts, cataract surgery. And so that's sort of like an indication that they're getting older. They're certainly, the conditions of their confinement have accelerated, their age, if you will. Some that maybe in their 30s are not doing well. In fact, there's one prisoner who was recently released who was just obese and was suffering from diabetes. Is that what Abraham Idris had?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they wanted to quickly they blocked his release for quite some time, and this time they decided not to contest it, but they really wanted to get him out there because they were worried that he was going to die at Guantanamo. So it's strange. Guantanamo is a strange place, and it's very, very difficult to report on Guantanamo, and to provide my readers with as accurate as picture as possible. In fact, one last thing is when I was there were some attorneys there at the same time. And so here I am in the prison for an entire day in prison grounds, and they have a library, they have a hospital, and this dining hall where they want to show you how they prepare the food. They're like, look, taste the food. They gave me a taste samples of food to test to see, look how good it is. Again, think about this. Look how good the food is. What will be my response? Wow, this is really good food. Why are they complaining? Well, look, they get Iron Man 3 on DVD and an Xbox. Well, what are they complaining about, Andy? Everything's fine. And that's sort of what they're, this sort of, what they're trying to, put, and some reporters run with that and say, you know what, folks, these prisoners have it fine. In fact, one of the nurses said to me, when I was asking them about, the force feeding, and he said to me, well, you know, the lifespan of the prisoners here at Guantanamo is far greater. They can live longer here than they can in some of their home countries. And I quoted him saying that. I mean, he was on the record saying that. On the record, you know, I mean, his name was Leonardo. They had Shakespearean names that day, or that trip.
Shakespeare or Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, no, I know, yeah. This was from Much Ado About Nothing. That's what his name came from. You know, again, the lingo even there is different. Restraints are called humane restraints. Force feeding is called enteral feeding. Solitary confinement is called single cells.
Prisoners are called detainees.
Prisoners are called detainees. In fact, when I had some questions saying, oh, you know, when are we going to take the prison tour of this adjacent? I don't know what you're talking about. And they were serious, but we don't have a, you know, a prison here. We have a detention facility. But they are, you know, they're taught this. This is what they're taught. And it's you know, it's very important to them. So with that, I'm going to end my discussion and thank everyone for coming out. Annie and I are going to sing a song together right now. Kind of feel like we should, my friend, right?
Thank you.
Can you take some questions?
Sure.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I just want to get some water. Do you want to find this? Yeah, could you get me some water? Yeah.
Yes.
What I want to add, what does it serve those who support Guantanamo? What does it serve?
Excuse me?
What does it serve us or those who support Guantanamo?
Fear. There is, when you say support, why are they backing?
How do they get out of it?
What do they get out of it? Well, you know, a lot of this this is my opinion, my analysis, is driven by fear. Fear, there is certainly some...
Fear of what?
Fear that we're going to be attacked. Look what they're doing. They're going to be attacked. You know, Andy told you about Yemen. Okay, Yemen's a big country. Yemen is not, you know, Harbor Boulevard. You know, Yemen is a big country, but this is sort of, you know, exceptionalism, if you will, this, you know, that we have is that it's that big, and you know, they're going to go back to this country and fall into terrorism and you know, join the jihad. And look, you know, the reality is some have done that. It's that is not a justification for, you know, for holding people, but for those who do support it, it's you know, it's fear. It's certainly politics, and you know, again, you question, like, why are we having military commissions as opposed to prosecuting some of these men on U.S. soil?
If they closed it and released them and they did something, then politically they'd be good, right? I mean...
Excuse me?
Let's say if Obama said, okay, we're going to close it, I'm going to do an executive order, we're going to close it, we're going to do this.
He did that.
Yeah, he actually did it. And then somebody actually got involved in doing something, in a terrorist activity, then he would be dead politically. I mean, they would beat him to death of that.
You know, sure. You know, guess what? The healthcare website didn't work well, did it? Right? Oh well. Guess what? Life goes on. It's getting fixed. It's certainly not a, you know, a justification if you want to sort of you know, stand on a pedestal and claim how great our, you know, your Constitution and your laws are, to certainly then say, well, yeah, we're going to kind of follow the law when it's kind of cool, or when we want to. You want to respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, I also just wanted to say that I think when people talk about these things, it's important to try and suggest that we should have a sense of proportion. Clearly, there have been people who have returned to the battlefield. It's not as many as we've been told. If you ever look at the figures, usually you get headlines screaming, 1 in 4 prisoners returns to battlefield. Those are not substantiated figures. Those are figures that are presented without any documentary evidence. The Pentagon did it for years. The Director of National Intelligence has been doing it. Jason and I think, would both very much agree that if a man in a uniform stands on a podium and reads out from a single A4 sheet of paper, and you then go away and print that on the front page of a newspaper without asking for the evidence to back it up, that's not journalism.
Well, you do
Right.
with your Fox
That's just
News.
taking part in the propaganda
Yeah.
issue. Well, they expected of Fox News, but actually over a process of years they did this, and more reputable news sources than that just took it away. Because an editor was going, hey, that's going to get readers, hey, that's going to get viewers, that's not responsible reporting. Now, the recidivism rate in domestic prisons is what, 60 to 70%? People expect the recidivism rate at Guantanamo to be zero.
Right.
Zero. I don't mean 0.01%. Zero. How can that be realistic? It's not. So the sense of proportion that is required is that, yes, it may be that a man is released from Guantanamo, and who knows, maybe one of those men is going to end up in some battle zone somewhere, dying as a jihadist, maybe. Is it at all plausible that any of these men that are released are going to engage in a major act of international terrorism against the United States? I have to say confidently, no, it's not. And one particularly good reason for that is that the only people they're going to release are men that they've cleared for release. And the reason they're for release is that they didn't regard them as constituting a significant enough security threat to carry on holding in the first place. How many doors do you have to go through to get out of Guantanamo? If you can, and if you agree with this, when you have the opportunity to challenge people on this, I would, because what are being set up here are insurmountable barriers. And apart from the fact that I think that it's unjust to keep finding excuses not to release people that you said you didn't want to hold, it's also counterproductive. The things that happen at Guantanamo don't happen in isolation. President Obama always says it. I know members of his administration believe in this. I believe that some senior Republicans like John McCain have spoken about it. America is endangered by the lawlessness of Guantanamo. By holding people in this manner, it enrages people who are likely to want to engage in activities that hurt the United States. And I think that's more likely the more prisoners are held at Guantanamo. So I don't find a good argument for not releasing people. I understand your point. It's,
I'm just saying, you know,
No,
that
absolutely.
plays a part in it.
yeah, no, it plays a very big part in it. Yeah.
You know, I mean, the people who are going to be influenced, not just President Obama, but people who are on his coattails.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, I mean, might get a Republican president again.
You don't want a Republican president. I'm surprised they had you mentioned Fox News, and then you said that they had season's greetings. It seems like the U.S. Army's trying to take Jesus out of Christmas or something. Put season's greetings
Oh,
there
right,
rather
yeah.
than Merry Christmas. Well, I was just going to ask you were talking about visiting the prisoners. What are their cells like? I mean, you could say all these things about that they have free meals and they have comfort and stuff, but they're in prison, right? Even if they
They're-
call it
it-
a detention center.
It was detention center, detention facility, not a prison. It was, first of all, let me just say, I took about 500 photographs, and they're all online, and you can check them out. I have a Flickr page where these photos are up, but it does resemble, just a maximum security prison cell that you would see here, because these prisons were based off of, I think there's a prison in Indiana that this was modeled after. So, they're 10 by 6 cells. They have, a bed with a very sort of thin, mattress that's, not even bolted to the wall, just sort of like coming out of the wall. A metal sink and toilet, and that's it. And
But they're
bins where they can put their
single
mail.
rooms, right?
They're single rooms. Yeah, they don't share rooms with with each other. So.
Are the lights on all the time? I think they are.
No, the lights do, go off or dimmed.
Progress. What have I got to complain about?
Yeah, right, exactly, Andy.
see it all the time.
But it's very important to sort of, keep in mind that there are standard operating procedures, but with each sort of, new guard force that's coming in, things change. This is all part of, okay, I'm the man in charge now, and this is the way things are going to be. And you never get used to that, so.
Yeah.
I guess you're passing
the microphone around, is that how it's
Yeah,
going?
that's what we're doing. I just want to mention the basket going around, what we're planning to do, and these gentlemen don't know it, but we're going to split whatever we can take in. This was a free event 50/50
Oh, I did. I
with
paid
the
extra $10.
church. So 50/50 with the church and 50/50 to take care of your expenses.
Well, thank you very much.
Question?
I got a question. Where do you get the money for lawyers to be suing these people?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Somebody else asked me that question on Facebook, and I just didn't answer it.
She's a lawyer.
Well, I'm fortunate that I have I have a freedom of information. I have an attorney who specializes in the Freedom of Information Act, and I pay the filing fees. I will tell you that the filing fees are expensive, and I pay for it out of my own pocket. I hope that I eventually obtain the material. I just filed 3 lawsuits since September of 2012, 2 against the CIA and 1 against the Department of Defense. So, the filing fees are expensive, and it's my hope that when I obtain the material that I can, then obviously have a story to sell. But not many reporters use the Freedom of Information Act. It's a powerful tool. I've had great success with it. Our colleague, his name is Jeffrey Kay. He writes about torture. He's up in the San Francisco area, and I had told him, I said, Jeff, let me teach you about the Freedom of Information Act, and I did, and I taught him how to do some requests, and he filed a request and obtained what I happen to think is one of the most important documents to come out of Guantanamo, the sort of treatment of prisoners in custody of the U.S. government and military. And this was a document, this was a Department of Defense Inspector General report that was about an investigation into the use of mind-altering drugs on Guantanamo prisoners and prisoners elsewhere. And this report, basically said, there's no evidence that they're being used. There's no evidence. This is what the report said. There's no evidence that that prisoners were drugged for the purposes of interrogation. However, we found evidence that prisoners who were interrogated were under the influence of drugs that have mind-altering effects. Think about that. There's no evidence that they were, interrogated purposely as a result, but they were interrogated while they were on it. So this is an incredible report. That's just an example of how successful this tool. But I'm fortunate that I have an attorney who doesn't really, basically works off of attorney fees. And
Well, maybe is there a federal law that if you win the case, you get attorney's fees?
yes, there is. But I don't. I sort of,
I mean, your attorney gets paid.
Right, he gets paid exactly, which is sort of, we hope that we, that we win. But it also puts the government on notice that, look, we're serious. I'm not doing this and just, playing around, for lack of another word that I would have used. But
I was wondering how you write for the Guardian. I heard you this morning on KPFK. It was a very good delivery that you gave. But I was
I'm glad it wasn't that early in the day. That's even better.
Yeah, but you didn't actually mention any newspapers. How did the Guardian or one of the Independent or London? Did any of them write up these stories that you've been covering, or what's been happening in England about that? Like Have Your Say, I know the fellow who does Have Your Say on the BBC.
Oh right, okay. Well, I sometimes have things to do with the mainstream media. I'm quite it's quite a modern story of my presence on the internet in a lot of ways. My website is one that I just established in 2007. I started writing about Guantanamo all the time. It turned out the internet works in such a way that if you focus on something and you know what you're doing, people come and find out. I did set up a website campaign 2 years ago with my friend and colleague Tom Wilner, who's the lawyer who successfully argued the Guantanamo prisoners' cases in the Supreme Court in 2004 2008. And that's called Close Guantanamo. So that's closeguantanamo.org if people want to come and visit that. I put regular reports up there. And the British media has generally been very good, actually.
Yeah. And they got that prisoner released who was British, remember, a while back.
Well, yeah, a long time ago, a lot of us in Britain worked to get prisoners released, yeah.
But I wanted to say one more thing. was living in a condo in Irvine and since moved, but the chap next door to me, when I was parking, I said, well, I've just been running for the city council. And he said, oh, I just got back from Guantanamo. So I made a comment about, well, I hope that was a good experience. He said, well, I was just doing my job, bringing justice. I mean, he was so proud that he had spent a year over there, and, you know, obviously he was a Marine. And so have you gone and interviewed some of these
Yeah, Andy and I were having this conversation on the ride over here on our journey, 2-hour journey from Los Angeles. You know, what's unbelievable, what I find so striking is that in the 12 years, you know, that Guantanamo has existed, and the thousands of guards that have gone through the facility, there have not been, there's only, you can count them probably on one hand, maybe part of two hands, the ones who have come out publicly, when I say publicly, to say, I want to tell my story, I want to share my experiences. There are, you know, there aren't many. I have interviewed some. In fact, during this last trip, there were, you know, there was a couple of guards that I interviewed. One was 19, one was 20. You know, and if you think about 9/11, they were, you know, 8 and 9, or, you know, 7 and 8. 9/11, it's like, what are you doing here? You know, because that's the whole reason that Guantanamo was sort of, you know, set up after 9/11. But, you know, I try to interview guards, and the ones that I have approached, because I have been put in touch with them, are afraid, or ashamed, or suffering from PTSD. You know, I think that, for me, what I find to be somewhat important, you know, I think it's important to have, I try to have, you know, empathy in my reporting and try to show that side. And I think that even with the guards, yes, some of them do have that attitude. You know, and I know one who had that attitude, and then a couple of years went by, and, you know, he was sort of suffering. They start having these memories, and that, you know, some of them were put into positions that, you know, they did things that they did not want to do, and suffered for it. So, you know, it's suffered for it mentally, and I also think some of those stories are important, but not enough of them have come out to share their experiences.
I just want to know, could you say again, what do you think we should do? Just
Me?
Regular people.
I think Andy's best to answer that. Honestly, I have to, you know, just say from my end, I don't know. That's why I think we complement each other, because Andy can tell it to you, and he's British, and he sounds so great, you know, doing it, and he's so eloquent, and so I even like listening to him. So.
How do I follow that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the accent. Okay. Well, you know, I think there are these two fronts, and you know, I can't say now exactly what I think is our best tactic. Those of us that are involved, various groups and individuals, I'm sure we'll work towards concrete plans, and we'll, you know, let you know about those in due course. Keep an eye on Close Guantanamo, and I'm sure that some of you here know about World Can't Wait as well, who I've been with on this tour. So watch their website as well. But you know, it is particularly it's the issue of making sure that there is pressure on clearing the rest of the released prisoners. Now it happens at the moment that 21 of those men are from a variety of countries, and I have no doubt that the envoys appointed by President Obama, as I said, are trying to do their job. These are serious people. They didn't take a job so that they could fail. There was the intention of them being able to do things. I think it's a good idea to write to them. Why not? You know, say, guys, we've heard that President Obama has appointed you. We're very glad to hear that. Is there anything that we can do to help? What's happening? You know, let's try and find out what's happening. Otherwise, if you need FOIA requests, do you know they call him a FOIA terrorist? The Yemenis. I'm talking to groups. I'm talking to people who are lawyers for the Yemenis. There's a lot of hostility in this country towards Yemen. You know, I happen to think that a lot of the problems in Yemen have directly been engineered by the United States government. There are drone killings taking place in Yemen all the time. Well, I know exactly, but not everybody knows that. You know, not everybody knows that at all. So they're just told that Yemen is this unstable place. How can you think about sending people back there? And so we need to make a case. So I'm trying to work with people to say, let's find the stories of some of these men. Let's go and visit their family members. Let's try and get some of their family members to come over here to meet with people in Congress to get the publicity. Because most of these people they're no longer young lads, but most of them were. They're now in their early 30s. As Jason has told you, they probably look a lot older than that. They're probably greying and very thin, even though they're only in their 30s. But most of these are just still quite young men who want to go back and rebuild their lives. They want to get married. Some of them had kids when they were young. They want to go back and see them. So it's how we can overcome that, that wall of hostility that we get with these things. Because you know, the people that are cheerleaders for Guantanamo are very loud about it. So we have to find a way to fight back against them, to make them look like they're the overreacting idiots that frankly they are. The other issue is the one that we have to keep an eye on as to how we're going to get the prison closed, and that's the one where it's a little bit more nuanced. It seems to me. What I'm going to try and do is find out which lawmakers voted for what, in terms of helping the Senate pass those provisions that made it easier to release prisoners. Because we need to find people that we can put pressure on to say, this place needs to be closed. This place isn't going to close by magic. The only way it's going to happen is that this permanent opposition to bringing the prisoners is overcome. It's part of the hysteria. They make these people out to be supermen, and they're not. They're either just these soldiers who've been held for too long, or if they are terrorists, some of them are terrorist suspects, just a few of them. If they're not supermen. These are just criminals. They may be particularly nasty criminals, some of them, but they're not. Let's not make them into supervillains. Let's not make them into superhumans. So those are the two areas that I would say are the best ones for us to work on. And as I say, there will be more detailed plans coming up as the year goes on, I'm sure.
You had a question for quite some time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'd like to know if the prisoners were allowed to perform some of their religious functions, their praying and washing before and that type of thing. Did you notice?
Again, these are things Andy and I discussed on our way over. Yes, I did. In fact, I will say that when I was there, and I'm only going to speak about when I was there, they were very respectful of the religion. In fact, I had the opportunity to observe, or at least listen to morning prayers, and I filmed it. Now, I did not see it because I was not allowed to see their faces, but I heard it, and I heard these voices. This voice that was, this rare moment of beauty in this, setting, that is Guantanamo. However, they are allowed to do that. They pray several times a day, and their food is all halal prepared food. However, one of the things that sort of gave rise to the hunger strike, or one of the actions that took place in the aftermath of the death of the prisoner in September of 2012 named Adnan Latif. It's such a tragic story. But they suspected that he was hoarding medication in his genital area, or in the binding of his Quran. So they implemented two new policies that had previously been off limits, because some of those policies, or some of the last time they did that, actually resulted in a mass hunger strike in 2006 that the media has, the short attention span on, didn't realize that. And that was searching their genital area, which is, culturally insensitive to do that, and holding, their Qurans and thumbing through it. And they started doing that, and that ultimately sort of, almost caused a riot. So in that regard, they're still doing that. From what I understand, at least on the genital searches, but with regard to prayer, they did respect it.
Did you record it? Did you record them? Was it audio? Did you hear them singing?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I suppose I could try to play it, but it's, I did record it.
Jason was explaining to me, I mean, it just sounded, you know, like you said, just a very beautiful moment. And for prisoners that I've spoken to, or when I've heard them talking to themselves or read about things, they all really appreciate the singing. They all know the brothers who had the beautiful singing voices. That was it.
Yeah, so.
Yes, last summer, I manned a table in the free speech area at the Orange County Fair. And our booth was to shut down Guantanamo. And I talked to a lot of people, and most of them actually were sending them, emptying Guantanamo, putting them on ships and sinking them.
If that's what they were, you're saying that that's what they thought
that's what their opinions were. But there was also a young Army wife that came, I think she was Army. Anyway, she came up to us and was so grateful we were there. Her husband had been stationed at Guantanamo, and when he got his orders, he was so glad he wasn't going to Afghanistan. But when he got home, she was wishing he had gone to Afghanistan because he was in such terrible shape. He participated in the forced feeding, and it tore him up. It was really, he was having nightmares and stuff about it. So she was so...
This was last summer, you said?
This was last summer. So...
You know, I'm sorry, dude, I may have cut you off.
No, that was my comment.
Yeah, I mean, that is, like I said, you know, some of them, they think like, oh, I'm going to Guantanamo, it's not combat. And I do have, you know, I have empathy for, you know, certainly some of the guards. I know them. I've actually befriended some of the guards who, and so has Andy, you know, so it's just, you know, it's terrible. We have no idea what kind of, you know, what the PTSD rate is there, where we would perhaps in, you know, in other settings. You know, when I was there, it was, other than that one guard who said, I'm, you know, ready to get the F out of here. You know, I mean, he was serious. He was like, and it was just always, I gotta get out of here. I'm ready. And you know, his head was shaking. He says, I gotta go home. You know, that was like, whoa. Do you want to add anything?
Only that I was going to say there are clearly a significant number of people who are upset at what they did, because Mozambique, who's one of the British prisoners, has told me that dozens and dozens of former guards have got in touch with him to apologise, you know, personally for the part that they played. As Jason said, it is only a few that have come forward publicly. But I suspect a lot of people that end up not knowing how to deal with it. Perhaps more in the past, except for people like this man who's really confronted with the realities of the place now. Because, you know, they've kind of locked down on all the worst things that they did, and it appears to me now to be a very, you know, closed, functional, dead kind of place where a lot of the time nothing much happens. And that the people that are working there do their little stint there, and, you know, aren't confronted with anything to shake them out of the brainwashing that they have. But
right.
It's sad to think about it, really.
Yeah.
Are you aware that Cuba sends back the rent that we pay every year for the loan of the property? It's really weird.
It's funny that you should mention that. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for a copy of all the canceled checks.
Thank you!
Which I thought would make a pretty good story. What else you got for us?
A couple more questions.
So Mike's right here. He's got a...
Yes, sir?
Over there.
I was wondering if you know whether all the detainees are Muslim. I mean, I think the broad consensus of the population in the United States would be that they are.
Yeah, my understanding is that they all were. Some of them were Shia Muslims, not Sunni Muslims. There was a poor Iranian well digger who was there at one point who claimed that he was a Catholic. I never found out that much of his story, but in the transcript
of what he said when he was hauled up in front of a tribunal. That's what he said. Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, and that's what makes it extremely difficult not to regard this as being something that's directed at Muslims, when the entire population is Muslims. It kind of adds up, really. And you know, the arguments might be, oh well, this could have been anybody, but I find it very hard for it not to look like it's specifically directed at Islam because of that.
Are you passing the mic around, or?
I could just get here.
Yeah.
What do you know about the reconditioning of, they're talking about doing for some of the detainees afterwards, and is that a good thing? The brainwashing kind of rehab thing they're trying to push?
Well, you know, that's one of the problems with Yemen, is that they don't want, I mean, it's always been a problem even since Bush. What they never honestly wanted to do at the beginning was let people go. They wanted to release people from Guantanamo and have them be re-imprisoned by their home governments. Now, to their credit, almost every home government said, are you kidding?
Yeah.
You know, you have no reliable evidence against these people. You've treated them appallingly, and you're expecting to send them home and for us to do that. You know, and most of them said, you know, well, actually we have laws in place to prevent us from imprisoning people that we don't think did anything wrong, or that we can't prove did anything wrong. Now, when the Saudis were released from Guantanamo, and it took some time really for the Saudis to be released, there were over 100 of them as there were the Yemenis. And it took a long time, even though there were very, very close ties between the United States based on, what would that be? Oil and money, that's it. Oh, and arms contracts. It took, the list goes on. It took quite a long time because, of course, the Bush administration was rather upset that when they added up the number of 9/11 hijackers, they all seemed to be Saudi. But eventually the Saudi government said enough is enough, and particularly after 2 of the 3 men who died in June 2006 were Saudis. And President Bush started releasing them in batches, and the Saudi government had a rehabilitation program to provide religious re-education, supposedly away from the fanaticism of the sheikhs who'd been apparently, you know, indoctrinating them. Although, you know, that is the state religion in Saudi Arabia, so it's quite difficult. Wahhabism is quite extreme. But they also, you know, they helped them with jobs, they gave them money, they helped find them wives. They went to a lot of effort. And I think that that was largely successful, although it tends to have been, the successful name of that tends to have been blackened by the fact that, again, it wasn't 100% successful because nothing is. And a handful of Saudis are supposed to have formed this cell in Yemen. But the Yemeni sticking point seems to be that although cleared, the Obama administration doesn't want to release cleared prisoners because it wants to make sure that there's another facility down the line which will enable them to be held. It would need to be some kind of rehabilitation center, but it would also need to be, the purpose of it would need to be a buffer between Guantanamo and re-entering society, not something that resembles a prison, otherwise you're not releasing them. I mean, you know what I mean? It just goes round and round. So there are apparently negotiations that are trying to be underway, but I think progress is quite slow, yeah. Jason may know a little bit more about this.
I mean, part of, at least with Yemen, you know, that is so political because under Bush, they had, you know, there had been this promise of, you know, we'll give you $250 million, Yemen, build this facility, make it like a prison, just hold them. And that obviously never came through, and so now there's, you know, part of the sticking point here is money. You know, in Kuwait, just as an example, they already have a rehabilitation center, but it sits in the middle of this prison, and it's empty. It was built at at great expense. There are 2 Kuwaitis left at at Guantanamo who have not been cleared for release, if I'm not mistaken, Fayez, and but they have this rehabilitation center, and so. It's just not being used. But keep in mind that as Andy indicated, some of these men were just frankly wrong place at the wrong time. You could have been wearing a certain style Casio watch. No joke. The Defense Intelligence Agency actually has saying if you see this person with this watch, they're probably terrorists, and they would get picked up. So it's kind of odd to sort of say, okay, you have to go to a rehabilitation center. But I didn't do anything. I was on a farm when you picked me up. So, in the back, sir.
All right. Is there just sort of like globally, historically, is there a precedence to Guantanamo? Is there? Do you know of any other country that would detain people?
Russia.
Okay, but well, I'm not talking about Stalin style, but perhaps do you know of Norway doing this to Somalis, or I don't know. I'm just asking.
Well, I mean, there are oftentimes off the top of my head, I don't know, but what I can tell you is that, and this was I'm not sure what the right word is, but it fired me up when it happened a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when the State Department, Hillary Clinton's office, issued a press release, and this was a press release announcing sanctions against Iran, against certain individuals of Revolutionary Guard in Iran, and basically what they had said, or that was, part of the reason that they were, issuing these sanctions was because Iran, holds, they're torturing and holding prisoners indefinitely without charge or trial or access to a lawyer. And I was like, what? Did they just really say that? Was that really, on this press release? And sure enough, it was. But the previous precedent at Guantanamo, by the way, or rather, with that sort of related to Guantanamo, is the United States holding Haitian refugees at Guantanamo in the 1990s, indefinitely in camps without, releasing them. And again, it was this fear. It was this fear that they are HIV positive. They're going to come to the United States and they're going to spread AIDS, and we're all going